Put the bunny back in the box. Con Air wasn't just another over-the-top 90 seconds action movie. It was chaos stitched together with fireballs, eccentric performances, and one of the most bizarre ensemble casts ever assembled. Behind the slow-motion explosions and quotable one-liners lurked dangerous stunts, bitter fights, and wild improvisations. What audiences saw was polished insanity. What the crew endured was a near-disaster circus. Today, we're breaking down 20 weird facts about Con Air, from plane crashes that almost happened for real, to Nicolas Cage's shocking character choices, to hidden references buried in the editing bay. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a secret about the film's most infamous prop that will blow your mind. Buckle up, hit the runway, and let's dive in. Nicolas Cage insisted on the accent. Cameron Poe's southern drawl wasn't in the original script. Nicolas Cage demanded it, arguing it gave Poe a more grounded, everyman quality. Producers were horrified, fearing the voice would sound cartoonish. On set, Cage tested variations daily, driving sound editors crazy. Jerry Bruckheimer eventually relented, saying Cage's conviction made it impossible to refuse. Critics were split. Some mocked it, others praised the sincerity. But here's the kicker. Cage based the voice on family members from Alabama, making it personal. The accent became a meme decades later, proving Cage's instincts weren't as off as studio executives feared. Not over the top, but strangely authentic. What audiences didn't know is that Bruckheimer once tried to dub over Cage entirely before test audiences rejected the idea. That southern drawl was nearly erased forever. The runway explosion went wrong. The massive finale, with the plane skidding through Las Vegas, involved real pyrotechnics and a full-scale model of the jailbird. On the day of filming, one explosion detonated earlier than planned, nearly torching the stunt team. Fireballs erupted so violently they shattered casino windows nearby, sparking lawsuits. Crew recalled the heat being unbearable even from hundreds of feet away. But here's the twist. The misfire looked so spectacular on film that Bruckheimer ordered it kept in. Insurance agents were furious, warning production was skirting disaster. Not fake, but dangerously real. The Vegas authorities nearly shut the production down. That chaotic blast wasn't just staged mayhem, it was an accident immortalized on screen. Dave Chappelle wrote his own jokes. Dave Chappelle's character, Pinball, wasn't scripted as comic relief. Writers had given him throwaway lines, but Chappelle ad-libbed nearly all his dialogue. Crew members said the actor improvised on the fly, often breaking Nicolas Cage's composure mid-take. Some of Chappelle's material was so sharp it forced rewrites to make scenes funnier. But here's the twist. His death scene falling from the plane was originally serious, even tragic. Chappelle suggested adding the gallows humor line about catching a ride. It stayed, cementing Pinball as one of the most memorable minor characters, not just comic relief, but the glue balancing brutality with humor. Without Chappelle's improvisations, Con Air would have been far grimmer and less quotable. The prisoner cast hated each other. John Malkovich, Ving Rhames, and Danny Trejo played psychotic convicts, but their off-screen tensions were just as wild. Malkovich openly resented the constant script changes, saying it felt like acting inside a blender. Trejo clashed with producers over how far his character could go, accusing them of cutting violent material out of fear. Rhames kept to himself but later admitted the shoot felt toxic. Cage, caught in the middle, tried easing tensions by staying in character even off-set, something that only made things worse. The atmosphere wasn't camaraderie, but competition. What audiences didn't know is that the cast actively avoided each other during downtime, leading to bizarre on-set silences between explosive shootouts. That hostility bled into their performances, making the tension feel frighteningly real. The real crash that inspired the Vegas ending The climactic plane wreck through Las Vegas wasn't just action movie fantasy. Writers were inspired by a real 1,990 seconds cargo plane incident where an aircraft overshot the runway and plowed into a commercial area. Jerry Bruckheimer loved the imagery and demanded it be escalated into a full-scale casino demolition. To pull it off, filmmakers built a 270-foot replica of the C-123 plane, smashing it into a stretch of Vegas slated for demolition anyway. But here's the twist. Residents didn't know filming was happening, and the crash terrified onlookers who thought it was real. Calls to emergency services flooded in, not just spectacle, but an echo of actual aviation disasters. The wreck wasn't simply movie magic, it was rooted in real-world terror. John Cusack refused to promote the movie. John Cusack, who played U.S. Marshal Vince Larkin, is one of the only major stars from Con Air who flat-out refused to do press after filming wrapped. Why? He hated the movie. Cusack considered the script cartoonish and said the endless explosions buried any substance. During production, he reportedly clashed with the director over Larkin's cheesy hero moments. By the time the film premiered, Cusack skipped interviews, red carpets, and junkets, leaving Nicolas Cage, John Malkovich, and Jerry Bruckheimer to carry publicity. His absence didn't hurt box office, but fans noticed. Not commitment, but disdain. To this day, Cusack rarely talks about Con Air in interviews. What audiences didn't know is that his character was supposed to get a bigger showdown with Malkovich's Cyrus the Virus, but Cusack lobbied to cut it. He wanted out. Even during filming, the bunny wasn't. Supposed to be iconic, the stuffed bunny Cameron Poe buys for his daughter was meant as a throwaway prop, but Nicolas Cage latched onto it, calling it a symbol of Poe's humanity. He insisted the bunny reappear throughout the film, creating a running motif. Crew members thought it was ridiculous, joking on set about the Bunny Chronicles. Yet the prop became the film's most famous visual, immortalized in memes and merchandise. Not an accident, but Cage's obsession. Here's the kicker. Multiple bunnies were made for shooting, but only one survived production. That surviving bunny was quietly auctioned years later and fetched tens of thousands. What audiences didn't know is that Cage personally rewrote dialogue to include the phrase, "the bunny," forcing the stuffed toy into cinematic legend. Steve Buscemi's character scared the crew. Garland Green, played by Steve Buscemi, is one of the creepiest convicts in action movie history. His calm, soft-spoken menace terrified not just audiences, but crew members. Between takes, Buscemi would sit silently, staring into space, staying in character for long stretches. Extras playing guards admitted they were uneasy working near him. Originally, the studio wanted Green to commit an on-screen act of violence, but test audiences found him scarier because he didn't. The infamous Tea Party scene with the little girl was so unsettling that producers debated cutting it. Not gore, but suggestion. What audiences didn't know is that Buscemi himself was unnerved, saying Green wasn't a guy I wanted to live with for long. The restraint made the performance unforgettable. Nicolas Cage did his own dangerous stunts. Cage is notorious for doing his own stunts, and Con Air was no exception. He trained extensively with military consultants to make Poe's combat scenes feel authentic. But the most shocking moment, he actually ran alongside a moving aircraft for one take, refusing to let a double step in. Crew members begged him to stop, fearing he'd trip near the plane's landing gear. Cage shrugged them off, saying, "Poe wouldn't hesitate. Not bravado, but immersion." He also took real punches during fight sequences, resulting in bruised ribs by the end of filming. What audiences didn't know is that the studio increased his insurance coverage mid-production because his risks were so extreme. Cage's commitment nearly derailed the schedule, but it gave Poe his gritty authenticity. the soundtrack nearly got replaced. Trevor Rabin's thunderous score gave Con Air its pulse, but the studio almost scrapped it. Early test screenings suggested the music was too loud, too bombastic, overshadowing the dialogue. Executives considered replacing Rabin with Hans Zimmer, who had just scored The Rock. But Jerry Bruckheimer fought to keep Rabin, arguing the film's over-the-top tone needed an equally explosive sound. The result? A soundtrack that became iconic, with How Do I Live by Trisha Yearwood turning into a surprise radio hit. Not disposable, but legendary. Here's the engagement hook. Go ahead and like and subscribe because even the music of Con Air nearly got buried in chaos, and we're only halfway through these wild secrets. Without Rabin's score, Con Air wouldn't sound like the adrenaline-drenched beast we remember. The Vegas crash shut down the Strip. The climactic crash sequence caused more real-world chaos than expected. When the production staged the Jailbird wreck on Fremont Street, the noise and debris forced businesses to close for hours. Casinos complained of lost revenue, and tourists thought a genuine disaster had struck. Local police logged dozens of panic calls. Crew recalled angry casino owners storming the set demanding compensation, not fiction, but disruption. The shoot was so invasive that Las Vegas officials vowed never to allow such large-scale destruction again without stricter permits. What audiences didn't know is that some of the street-level footage used in the final cut wasn't staged extras, but actual bystanders caught on camera reacting to the noise. That terrified confusion you see on screen, half of it was very real. John Malkovich hated the script changes. Malkovich's chilling turn as Cyrus the Virus is iconic, but he nearly walked off set. The script kept changing daily, new lines, rewritten motives, altered action beats. Malkovich fumed, saying he had no idea what Cyrus was supposed to be doing from scene to scene. He vented to crew that it felt like shooting blindfolded. His professionalism carried him through, but tension boiled whenever rewrites arrived on set. Not smooth collaboration, but open frustration. At one point, Malkovich confronted director Simon West, demanding stability in Cyrus's arc. West reportedly told him, "Just be terrifying, that's all we need." What audiences didn't know is that Malkovich improvised many of Cyrus's eeriest deliveries, turning chaos into menace. His fury at the rewrites fueled the performance. The plane itself was a character. The C-123 transport plane, nicknamed the Jailbird, wasn't just a set piece. It was a real decommissioned military aircraft brought out of retirement for filming. The crew modified it to look grittier, welding steel plates and repainting it to resemble a flying prison, but working with an actual aircraft created headaches. The plane's engines often failed, forcing long delays. At one point, the hydraulic system leaked fluid across the tarmac, nearly grounding production permanently. Not a prop, but a living headache. Yet the authenticity was undeniable. The screeching metal and rattling interior you hear weren't sound effects, but the real aircraft groaning under stress. What audiences didn't know is that after filming, the plane was left abandoned in a desert airfield, becoming a bizarre tourist attraction for years. Danny Trejo's character sparked backlash. Danny Trejo's character, Johnny 2-3, is one of the most despised villains in the film, written as a serial rapist with tattoos marking his crimes. The explicit nature of the role alarmed advocacy groups during early screenings. Feminist organizations criticized the film for sensationalizing sexual violence. Producers defended the choice, saying Trejo's character embodied unredeemable evil. But here's the twist. Trejo himself hated the character's crimes, admitting in interviews that it was the hardest role he'd ever played. He campaigned to soften some of the dialogue, though not all his requests were honored. Not endorsement, but discomfort. What audiences didn't know is that Trejo later used his notoriety from Con Air to advocate for prison reform, hoping to shed light on real-world predators. The director was almost fired mid-production. Simon West made his feature debut with Con Air, but the studio nearly pulled him off the project. West, a former commercial director, was untested on a $75 million action epic. Producers panicked when his footage ran behind schedule, filled with excessive slow motion and wide shots. Jerry Bruckheimer stepped in as a buffer, defending West against executives demanding a replacement, not trust, but trial by fire. West doubled down, telling the crew he wanted Con Air to feel operatic, not generic. The gamble paid off. The heightened style became the film's signature. What audiences didn't know is that West was told privately, "If Vegas fails, you're done." The crash scene success not only saved the movie, it launched his career. Nicolas Cage's hair was a production nightmare. Cage's flowing mane, as Cameron Poe became as recognizable as the bunny, but it was almost impossible to manage. Cage wore extensions blended with his natural hair, and the desert winds on set constantly tangled them. Hairstylists spent hours before every take brushing, straightening, and restyling. Crew members joked the hair had its own trailer, not effortless, but exhausting. Cage was adamant the long hair symbolized Poe's years in prison and his southern roots. At one point, producers begged him to cut it shorter, fearing it looked too artificial. Cage refused, saying, "The hair is Poe's freedom." What audiences didn't know is that during the sweaty Vegas crash sequence, the heat singed some of his extensions, forcing last-minute replacements. That iconic look came at the cost of daily battles. A real prisoner advised the cast. To make the convict characters believable, the production brought in a real former inmate as a consultant. He trained actors on prison slang, body language, and gang dynamics. Ving Rhames later admitted he borrowed hand gestures and posture directly from this advisor. But here's the twist. Some actors became uneasy when they learned the consultant had served serious time for violent crimes. Extras recalled tense moments when his stories blurred into confessions. Not sanitized Hollywood, but raw reality. The authenticity he provided gave the convicts a frightening edge. What audiences didn't know is that John Malkovich refused to meet with him, fearing it would interfere with Cyrus's calculated menace. Even off-screen, the shadow of real prison life loomed over the set. The movie was edited for Brutality Con Air, originally contained much more graphic violence. Early cuts showed extended close-ups of stabbings, burn injuries, and Cyrus's more sadistic killings. Test audiences recoiled, and the studio panicked about an NC-17 rating. Multiple scenes were trimmed, and sound effects toned down. Not more action, but more horror. Jerry Bruckheimer later admitted they overshot the brutality and had to scale it back to maintain a popcorn movie tone. What audiences didn't know is that some of the deleted shots still exist, traded among collectors in grainy VHS dailies. Had they stayed, Con Air might have been infamous for gore rather than spectacle. The edits transformed it from disturbing thriller to action blockbuster, proving how thin the line was between success and disaster. The cast feared the desert heat. Much of the film was shot in the blistering Nevada desert, where daytime temperatures often topped 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Actors collapsed from heat exhaustion, and extras dressed as prisoners sweated through orange jumpsuits. Nicolas Cage reportedly fainted once after an intense fight sequence under direct sunday. Crew members resorted to spraying the cast with mist bottles and keeping giant fans on standby. Not glamorous, but grueling. The heat also warped some equipment, causing film reels to jam and cameras to malfunction. What audiences didn't know is that John Cusack threatened to walk off set unless filming schedules were adjusted to avoid peak sun hours. The brutal desert climate wasn't just backdrop, it became another antagonist, punishing everyone who worked there. The script was originally more serious. Before Jerry Bruckheimer got involved, Con Air was pitched as a gritty, character-driven thriller, closer to Silence of the Lambs than an action spectacle. Cameron Poe was written as a tragic anti-hero, and Cyrus the Virus was darker, with fewer quips. When Bruckheimer signed on, he demanded rewrites, bigger explosions, one-liners, and a patriotic arc. Not somber drama, but popcorn insanity. Screenwriter Scott Rosenberg admitted his original draft was more about desperation than spectacle. What audiences didn't know is that Rosenberg initially opposed the rewrites, but later admitted they made the film a box office juggernaut. The DNA of a psychological thriller is still buried under the fireballs, one of the strangest tonal shifts in 90 seconds Hollywood. The bunny's fate shocked everyone. Remember the bunny? The prop became a running gag during filming. Crew members pranked Cage by hiding it in bizarre places dangling from the debel, ceiling, stuffed in his trailer fridge, even taped to the plane's nose. But here's the twist. After filming wrapped, the bunny disappeared. For years, fans speculated it was lost or destroyed. Decades later, Nicolas Cage revealed on a talk show that he quietly took it home, keeping it in a glass case. Not trash, but treasure. The most ridiculed symbol of Con Air became Cage's personal keepsake. What audiences didn't know is that Cage called it a reminder of Poe's love and refused to part with it, even when collectors offered six-figure sums. The bunny survives, a bizarre relic of Hollywood madness. Con Air wasn't just another 90 seconds action spectacle. It was a fever dream of chaos, fueled by real danger, clashing egos, and outrageous creative choices. What looked like explosive fun on screen was built on sweat, tension, and sheer madness. And that's why, nearly 3 decades later, it still soars as one of the wildest action films ever made. If you loved uncovering these secrets, hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes chaos, and remember, in Hollywood, sometimes the strangest details are hiding in plain sight.